The dedicated teachers in our child development programs heard questions from several families asking about how to talk to their children about racism. And when they shared the concern, our development team leveraged new learnings from COVID-19 to create today's webinar. Leveraging distance learning techniques, we have attendees from all over the world engaged today. Furthermore, we have an amazing panel of experts, and it would have been extremely difficult to have all these leaders in one place at one time. So I'm proud of the way the team has made lemonade from lemons. Our panelists today include Dr. Anika Burtin, who holds a BA from Spelman, an MA from Columbia, and a Ph.D. from Northwestern. Dr. Burtin is the chair of the Division of Education, Health, and Social Work at the University of the District of Columbia. Easterseals is a proud partner with UDC for teacher training. Dawn Goldfein holds a BS in Education with a minor in biology and has taught kindergarten, first grade, and third grade for 29 years in Texas, Virginia, Idaho, and Italy. As the spouse of General David Goldfein, Chief of Staff of the U.S. Air Force, she's been an advocate for high-quality early education and inclusion for military families and serves on the Ambassador Committee of Easterseals, D.C., Maryland, and Virginia. Dr. Bryant Marks is a minister, researcher, trainer, award-winning educator, and leading authority on diversity and inclusion. He served on President Obama's Board of Advisors with the White House Initiative on Educational Excellence for African Americans. Dr. Marks was a contributor and trainer with the Obama administration's My Brother's Keeper and 21st Century Policing programs. Dr. Marks holds a BA from Morehouse, as well as an MA and a PhD from the University of Michigan. Jevonna Willis is the director of Easterseals, DC, Maryland, and Virginia's Head Start and Early Head Start program that provides high-quality early education to over 200 children every day. She's an expert in curriculum development and program assessment and holds a BS from Virginia State and master's degrees from Howard and George Mason. Now I'm pleased to turn the program over to Darnell Burtin. Darnell serves as Vice President of Development at Easterseals, DC, Maryland, and Virginia. And as the father of three, we will hope that he will ask many of the questions the audience wants to have addressed. But you can also feel free to ask questions in the Q&A box. Darnell?
John, thank you very much for that. And again, thank you so very much for our panelists here today. You guys did not come here to hear Darnell talk, but really quickly, I just want to first thank everyone for joining us. We had a humongous response, a tremendous response, not just nationally, but globally, to individuals wanting to hear about this topic. John's correct. One of our board members brought this up, and then John and I worked really hard on kind of fleshing out to the point where it is here today. Our format is going to go as follows. We're going to ask our panelists a question and allow them to elaborate a little bit more on themselves for 3 to 5 minutes, after which we will have a group conversation, some open dialogue, which we are asking you guys to share some of your Q&A, which we'd love to use during that group conversation. And then at the end of this, hopefully we'll have some time for some individual Q&A, and you guys can point questions at specific members of the panel. With that, my first question is for Dr. Marks. As a national trainer on implicit bias, can you briefly explain what it means? And then can you discuss what that means and how it impacts children? You're on mute, sir.
All right, there we go. Well, first I want to thank Darnell and John and the team at Easterseals for having me on. It's a pleasure to be here. Hello to the other panelists in the public space. And so, yes, this notion of implicit bias, we can just sort of step back a bit. Bias in general is just a tendency, an inclination, a proclivity towards a certain behavior, object, or person, right? So we all have biases. It's part of being human. We have preferences. It's just part of how we live life. Social bias is when we have a tendency or proclivity to treat certain people differently than others, okay? So you'll treat your kids different than other people's kids. That's a form of bias. You're not a bad person, but we cannot be in denial because everybody in our lives, we have different relationships with them. So having biases usually actually is self-protective. They're functional. They work to our advantage often, but sometimes they can go sideways. They can take us in the wrong direction. So, for example, if I said to you, police officer, and you thought male, that doesn't make you sexist, but you might have lived a life where you happen to come across more male officers than female. That's what we're talking about at the implicit level. So basically, the way we describe it is there are two main ingredients of having implicit bias. I'll make this real simple, real plain. Two main ingredients. One, living in society. Two, having a brain, right? That's all it takes. If that applies to you, then yes, you have implicit bias like everybody else. So, because some people say, I don't have any biases, I'm a good person. This is not a character issue, folks, right? This is an exposure issue. The way to think about implicit bias is through the lens of disproportionate exposure. We have all been overexposed to certain groups and certain traits and certain groups in certain roles. And upon repeated exposure, our mind locks that association in at a subconscious level, and the seed for bias is planted. Example, if I said to you, besides Barack Obama, when I say President of the United States, what race comes to mind? You probably say white. I say, what gender comes to mind? You probably say male. Why do you say that? You're not sexist, you're not racist, but you've never seen a female president either. And with one exception, you haven't seen a non-white president. So it's not a matter of your character, it's a matter of you living in a society and having a brain and what you're overexposed to. Your mind takes it in at a subconscious level, the seed for bias is planted. It may blossom, it may not, but it's there, okay? So there's a universality to it. And I'm sorry, all right, there we go. Okay.
No, we're gonna come back to you. I appreciate that.
Okay,
Dawn,
all right.
So Bryant, thank you for that, and I appreciate it. Dawn, again, thank you for being on the panel. As someone who has taught early childhood education internationally, can you speak to us from a perspective of how racism, or how you've seen racism maybe manifest itself here and in other countries? And at what age would you say that kids notice race?
First of all, I'd also like to thank John Horowitz and you, Darnell, and the team members at Easterseals for having me. This is a great opportunity to start this conversation, and it's important. And I'm just privileged to be here. So yes, I've lived, my husband and I have been married 37 years. We are high school sweethearts, and our parents were in the military as well. And so I'm a military child. We've raised 2 children, so I'm a parent of 2 military children, and we have had the opportunity to live in a couple other countries and all over the United States. And it's been my experience that military children tend to have a little bit of an edge in exposed to different cultures because we tend to move our families frequently. And children, every person is born into an ethnic group, right? But how you feel about it and how their behavior is affected by it can differ. And kids are very observant. I taught elementary, early childhood. So that's where my experiences are. And it's these children pick up they become aware of their differences or their own skin color, or that they're a boy or a girl between the ages of 3 and 5. And so it starts very young. And how they feel about themselves is the attitudes that are, their awareness of different attitudes around them. Preschoolers are interested in their physical characteristics in themselves and in others. And if you ask them to do a self-portrait, they might pick up a peach crayon if they're white, or a brown crayon if they're black. So it starts very young. They're also aware of different languages, and that people might speak differently than they do. I think the thing for us to remember as parents and educators is to be honest and let them ask questions, right? So not to be colorblind, and in that we do have differences, and we want to celebrate those differences, but also our similarities, and allowing children to ask the curious questions. And sometimes those can be a little bit uncomfortable, but I think it's important for us as parents and educators to allow those conversations to happen.
So Don, I appreciate that. Thank you very much. Before I go into the other panelists, a true story about me is in 3rd grade, I was in the early 80s, without dating myself. I was one of the kids in Chicago who was, quote unquote, what they call the gifted and talented. I was one of the only guys from my community on Chicago's West Side that was bused 15 miles away to go to school every day. And then I would come home. My community was all Black. It's all I knew. It's all I saw. But my parents worked really hard to take me to areas like Oak Park and have me at the Salvation Army and put me in other programs. But my first instances of being called the N-word was on the playground at my elementary school. And it was in 3rd grade. So I was keenly aware of my color starting at around 8 or 9 years old. And it had to become a conversation that we had to start to have in our home at the age of 9. And so I think about that framework, and before I go into Anika, is as we started to have this conversation, think about you. Where was that first kind of aha moment of, yeah, I'm Black and this person is white or this person is Latino? Where do you think that you had that first aha moment? Anika, speaking from a position as both a current educator and as a professor who trains teachers, particularly educators, what are some of the real conversations you're having with both the students and those teachers in the classrooms?
So I think that a lot of the conversation that we have actually crosses the boundary of the conversations I have with high school students, as well as teachers who are training or students who are training to be teachers. And it really rests in this idea of deficit. And so as we're working with people who want to be teachers, we have to unlock these notions of what we assume about other people. And those conversations aren't always about difference. So like Bryant mentioned, we live in this society. And so we are inundated with images that tell us what certain people are like, what certain people can and cannot do. And so as teachers, sometimes people walk into a classroom and maybe very well meaning, but if we are locked into this notion that certain kids can't do because we've decided if you come from this neighborhood, you can't do. If you look a certain way, you can't do. And so we have to unpack that deficit model, but we also have to understand that kids have those deficit models as well. So because society says you look a certain way, which means you can't do, then you have kids who will sit in the classroom and say, Dr. B, I can't do that. Or they walk in with this idea of less than because that's what they have seen around them, or they don't see themselves in certain places when society says this is beautiful, this is smart, this is who holds power, this is who has knowledge, and you never see yourself represented there, then you start to build your own deficit model of who you are. And so those conversations happen on both ends, both with people who want to be teachers, people who are currently teachers, and even the students sitting in the classroom to say, you have to get past what you sort of built up inside and understand that you're not coming from a place of deficit and what your value is and what you bring to the table. And for teachers, understanding that every child in that classroom is valued and brings something to the table and can learn. So those are the conversations that we have in higher ed. Those are the conversations we have in secondary classrooms.
Thank you very much for that. I had muted myself so I could listen. So, Jevonna, as the on-site resident Easterseals kind of person, would you describe the student population as racially and economically diverse? And as a leader in your field, how do you think you begin to start to, at the younger age, break down some of those barriers?
So I would first of all like to say welcome to our Easterseals house, our online Easterseals Zoom house. So thank you to everyone for joining us today. We're definitely, excited and impressed to learn and grow with all of our panelists and those of you that are participating and asking questions. But Darnell, to answer your question, as an early childhood educator, I have been very privileged to just working a lot with, you know, I've worked with pre-service teachers. I'm spend a lot of time working with our teachers currently, in addition to having lots of experiences in, you know, this area as well as in New Jersey and other places. So to answer your question, for our, I am the director of the Easterseals Head Start program. And in a Head Start program, the whole purpose of Head Start is to prepare children that fall into the specific low income range for kindergarten success. So our job is to make sure that we prepare children for kindergarten. So we begin doing that as early as 6 weeks. And we have over 200 children that we do that with each and every day. And we've been able to do that for the past 2.5 years within our Head Start program. So if I'm answering your question correctly, one of the largest goals of the Head Start program is to support the entire family, right? So we not only support the children, but we also make sure we provide lots of resources for families. And as we look at that, we make sure that we're always doing needs assessment within our program development. We are also working to ensure our children have exactly what they need. And we do that by making sure they, I hear you even say you at 8 years old, right? But one of the things we know, like our children really, I mean, one of the things that's happening now when we see our children, sometimes they have phones and their access to information starts very early. So one of the first things we begin teaching our children, even when they attain languages, things that are alike and things that are different. And we do that by telling them who they are. Who are you? They learn who they are from us. So yes, we, when it comes to, tell me that question one more time, Darnell.
No, don't worry about it. So let's pause on that question because we're getting, let me do two things. First of all, Jevonna, thank you. Jevonna is specific to Easterseals, is the person, if you guys have any questions from that, what age range are we talking about, Jevonna?
6 weeks to kindergarten.
So 6 weeks to kindergarten. And I think, Bryant, this is a good, we're not getting ready to go to you yet, Brian, so don't start. But this implicit bias piece, and Jevonna, the answer is 3rd grade. So my parents sat me down at 8 years old to be prepared for 9 years old to talk about race. If you guys know this or not, Chicago, said by Dr. Martin Luther King, was the most racist city that he'd ever been to, even as he had been in Alabama in the 60s. And Chicago was very drawn by color boundaries instead of economic boundaries, unless you were closer to the downtown area. So Chicago was very much Mississippi and Alabama, even in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. So 2 things that I like, some housekeeping things. Number 1 is the Q&A is meant for you guys. So thank you for those that are asking questions, some great questions. Number 2, there's a poll that came up. We would ask that everyone take a peek at the poll. And we're over 250 people. So thank you guys for showing up. We really appreciate this. We understand this is a really important topic right now. As John said, I'm the father of 3, the husband of 1, and all of our panelists, everybody on here is a parent. I will share a quick story and then I'm going to ask a question. When the most recent thing happened with George Floyd, I moved, we live in a really decent neighborhood, a nice neighborhood, but I was quickly drawn to the fact that I would have to sit down with my son, who's almost 6 feet tall and who's in 8th grade, and have a conversation with him about what it means to be a young Black man. And I felt like I stole some of his innocence. And so it was a challenging conversation. And so that's getting ready to lead me to this piece, Bryant. How young is too young, or how young do you start the conversation about race? In leveraging your piece on bias, how young is young to start that conversation? And this part of the conversation, this is Bryant, Dawn, Jevonna, and Anika. Please feel free to chime in as Bryant's talking, as I'd love you guys to have a dialogue here.
I appreciate that. Yeah, so I think, the point was brought up already that race is noticed, by kids, 3 to 5 years old. The thing is, when kids first talk about race, it's pretty interesting. because it's like, it's different. They're like, ooh, look at that chocolate man over there and that vanilla man over there. Like it's food and it's colors and it's fun and it's fluffy, right? So kids know this difference. They don't add value. We do that. They learn that from us. They can tell a difference in the color, but they don't know this group is supposed to be better or smarter, all these stereotypes. They learn that by living in society and having a brain, right? So it can start early in terms of them noticing difference. Sitting them down with the conversation, I would say it's like education. It should be age appropriate. So at 3, 4, and 5, saying, hey, yes, people look differently. They come in different shades and different heights and different body types, and not one is better than the other. So set the baseline that people vary. There's diversity. The bottom line is diversity doesn't mean deviance. So let them know people differ, but that doesn't mean that one is necessarily better than the other. That's sort of your early lessons. And if it comes up like you, Darnell, when it was like the N-word, then the next conversation is, well, in our country, people haven't always been nice to each other, especially African Americans in this country. And there was a long period of time where African Americans were not treated very well by the people in charge of this country. Many of those people were white, but that doesn't mean all white people are bad. But you may live a life where these certain names will be directed towards you. They don't necessarily know you as a person, but because Black people in this country haven't always been treated well, some of that language may continue to arise, right? So it's this graduated thing. And then when you start talking about systemic racism and white privilege and those sorts of things, that's probably more 10, 11, 12, right? When they can grab more abstract concepts. So I would say I'll look at it in a graduated scale. But sometimes the situation, like Darnell with you, the situation is going to force you to have a conversation that may seem premature, but you have to have it anyway. So and a technique you can engage in real quick is balance of exposure. Just balance their exposure as they come through. Black and white dolls, Hispanic TV shows, just balance it out as much as you can early on.
So I was going to jump in because when Darnell talked about having tough conversations with his son, well, that son is also my son. So I'm gonna talk about how the mom and the teacher sort of address that conversation. So every summer, I require my kids from the minute they get out of school to read a book every week until school starts again. And so I choose the book list. I get some input from them, but I believe that stories are a way to teach and to help kids deal with concepts. So when our middle son, I'm gonna say it was after his 6th grade year, so going into 7th grade, I purposely chose 10 books that would introduce some of these tough conversations because I felt like a story was a way to wrap his head around some things that I felt were coming down the pike and a way we could talk about it without him necessarily feeling like, well, I have all these different friends and, what does that mean about my friends? But just sort of like Bryant said, these are things that happen, in the world and in our country. And so, every week there was a new novel and the novels dealt with the same themes, young African-American boys sort of navigating what race means in this country. There were instances of police brutality in some of those novels, not all. One even had the ghost of Emmett Till in it, so we could get that historical perspective as well. And so that was a way to begin to introduce that conversation, which is different, honestly, for my sons than it is for my daughter. And even the feeling of when they walk out of the house is different, although now things are changing to the point that it could be just as fearful for her. But what I've been exposed to is there's a heightened level of awareness for my sons. And so I was very intentional in how we were going to have this conversation, how we were going to introduce it in this household, and then being able to, like Bryant said, sort of talk about the history and, what this country, how this country has historically treated certain people and what that means for you, as you work to pursue your goals and dreams in this country.
So thank you, Nika. I want to jump in with Don and Jevonna specifically around this question. Don, you first and then Jevonna, because again, your hands are in the soil every day. So Don, how young did you notice your parent population? Because we have a question here that I think is kind of maybe pointed towards you. And let me find that. Thank you guys for asking these questions. One person says, I'm an Air National Guardsman and my base is located in a rural area that is mostly white. How do we approach conversations with kids and people who have very little interaction with diverse populations? So Dawn, I'll talk to that with you because you've been on lots of bases and lots of different communities. Is there any thoughts on that? And I think that kind of still aligns with the how young is where you start to have the conversation.
So thank you for the question. It is an excellent one. I'm going to reflect back on this weekend when I was with my granddaughter. I don't think we can start too young. She's 2 years old, and I just read a picture book with her. The title of the book is Spookily. I forgot who wrote it, but it's about a pumpkin patch, and one pumpkin in the patch is square, not round. And as the story progresses, you realize that the square pumpkin blocks a hole in the fence when this huge storm comes through and saves the pumpkins in the pumpkin patch. And I think by exposing children to differences, even on that level, and talking about, and how our differences can bring us, we can celebrate those differences and appreciate everyone's gifts, because our differences can fill in gaps, like Bryant and Anika were talking about, when you too, Darnell, that there are natural biases that we just come with based on our own experiences. So I don't think we can start too young. Now, given a 2-year-old, you can't really reason with, but just, just starting with that picture book and then taking it from there. I also think as parents and teachers, we probably need to be mindful about what, like I love what Anika does with her with your children, having them read a book a week. We cannot, and selecting that. So being mindful of what they're reading, what they're watching on television, social media for kids who are on that. I mean, they're getting signals from who knows where. And so I think as parents, that's one of our biggest challenges, is to, be mindful and stay on top of that, so that they're, and opening up the dialogue. I think, again, I go back to what I said earlier. This is a beautiful place to start, by having it and recognizing, as Bryant said, that we all have biases, and we need to, to make change, and our country's we desperately need to make change, and it starts with this.
Jevonna?
Absolutely. So one of the first things I think, back when I was a little girl, that you would watch on TV was Sesame Street, right? So we know that Sesame Street also has episodes in which they kind of reference and speak about differences, and they also speak about race. And they also have an opportunity to expose our children very early on. So when we think about the age, I would say once they begin to develop language, even at the age of 2, through books, through stories, through opportunities, through examples, I think that we have a very unique way in which we can do it, because we have to remember our early learners, they learn differently, right? Some of them learn by, they pick up things very fast just by watching. So, we want to make sure that we look at the dynamics of our children and how, and choose their interests, and make sure we give those resources and add those resources according to the interests of all of our children. But I would say at the age of 2.
Okay. Thank you for that, guys. Again, I want to thank everybody for participating. There are 12 questions sitting in our Q&A. And some of them, I would, excuse me, I would ask our panelists, if you're not talking, please shoot a response and answer some of those questions. Some are directly pointed at some of you, but the ones that aren't, just please feel free to respond. Here's a question, and Bryant, you gave me this before. How do we create accountability and allies across the space, right? Because really, if we're talking about talking to our children, what we're talking about is talking to the parents, right? Because you have to have the hard conversation with parents. And I'm gonna, again, use myself. I learned to driving to Mississippi as a 15-year-old. My dad woke me up and said, okay, here's where you learn how to drive. And I said, all right. And I said, well, how long am I going to drive? He said, you're going to drive until I tell you to stop. And we get to Tennessee, and he says, well, we can't stop now because we can't stop here. And this is in the 80s, right? And I said, why, Dad? He says, well, Black people can't stop here, especially at night. If you're hungry, go to get a piece of food in the back, or if you need to go to the bathroom, we'll pull over and you can do that. And so, again, these are markers in my head of me remembering my parents kind of placing that piece of bias about where's the safe place and where's the dialogue. So again, going back to you, Bryant, as parents, what is our role in this conversation? Where do we really have to lean in, and where do we create those allies to have different conversations about transforming what was to what needs to be?
Yeah, so on the ally conversation, I'm always one where you sort of drop your buckets where you are. So start locally. So whether it's your family, your neighborhood, your church, your coworkers, wherever you all are. So our workplaces tend to be a bit more diverse than our neighborhoods and places of worship. And so, and now it's happening. I consult with a lot of Fortune 500 companies and city and county government. And a lot of them are reaching out like, how do we talk about race? You know, we want to be allies. We don't want to overstep. And so I said, you know, if you want to be an ally, especially for Black folks, take on the psychology of blocking and tackling, right? Like, you got to start running back, right? But be the lineman, be the 300-pound lineman, open up the hole and let the running back go through. So white folks out there who want to be an ally, if you have Black folks in the organization that have ideas, they have initiatives, you know, they have assets. It's not a deficit approach. They have assets within their own group. Facilitate their assets being brought to the fore, right? It doesn't have to come through you, but you can bring that person to the table. You can assist with that idea being brought up. If you know in your organization, y'all been trying to start an affinity group, an equity committee for years, facilitate that, right? Help that sort of thing happen. So in allyship, you don't have to necessarily take the lead as much as you can understand, listen, understand, and facilitate. How can I assist you? How can I make that happen? Who can I talk to? Who can I call? Or somebody's in your way for doing that? Let me call them. I've known them since college, such and such, you know, pull back a little bit. That sort of thing could go a long way on the allied level, okay? You know, everybody's not built to protest and march and lay out on highways. I get that. Do things in your local space that can be significant. On the parenting side, I think it's back to that balance of exposure. Folks, we're living in a time where we have more control over the media we consume than in the history, any other point in the history of humankind. You turn on your cable TV, you got 700 channels. You got Netflix, you got Hulu, Disney Plus, Apple. You can watch what you want, when you want. You can literally curate all the content your kids consume. Get on a DVR and you watch the recorded stuff. You don't just let them sit down and turn channels. You control and coordinate what they watch. Go online, you can easily, there's many different outlets, you know, TV shows for reducing racial bias, that sort of thing. Whatever search terms you like, do your research, and then you can set your DVR from your phone, from a distance, right? Now, I know we have folks who are international where it may not be that easy and that accessible. It may take some more work, I get that. So back to Anika's point about books, Amazon ships internationally. All right, no plug for Amazon, don't mad at me. All right, but the notion is you may have to do some research to find these books. She'll send you a list or a link, right? And then make some effort. We want to have books that have main characters that look differently across the spectrum. So yes, as a parent, you have to take some initiative and some responsibility in your house dealing with your children, right? And then own your bias, right? All of us have them, okay? I don't care how woke you are, you're a Black woman, I don't care about that. You're human, you got a brain, you got bias too. Your job is identify what it is. I have a bias. I won't say what it is right now because I might offend some people. I'm just playing. I'll tell you what my bias is. I have a slight bias towards smokers. People who smoke cigarettes, right? I never dated a smoker. I never been close to a smoker. And I'll go through these airports and I see all these smokers in a little smoky room with a sliding glass door, looking all smoky. I'm like, why are they in that room? They come out smelling like smoke, okay? That's bias on my part. I can't judge the totality of their person by one bad habit. We all have bad habits. So I'm working on my thing as well. So as parents, you can open up as appropriate to showing that your kids, I have biases too, I'm working on them. People may see you through a certain lens. You may form biases towards other folks. It's a process. I'll stop.
John, I wanted to offer you the opportunity while you were considered a panelist. Did you want to chime in on any of these conversations as a leader of the organization or just as a leader in general?
Well, I will share super quickly. There was a question about how this topic fits into the historical mission of Easterseals to support children with disabilities and special needs. And I was answering in the chat, but really see the parallel of this to what Dr. Marks was sharing at the beginning about what people see is their experience, and then that becomes their assumption and their implicit perception. And so by having inclusive classrooms where we're serving children from different ethnicities, different socioeconomic classes, different ability levels, different military family status, we can really bring the community together in a way that enables all these children to see that they can be friends with each other and that they can bring, become additive to the class. And, that to me is really what the whole vision of Easterseals is. Darnell, you're on mute.
It made me unmute. I'm sorry. I was listening too. I'm trying to, I'm enjoying the conversation. Dawn, I wanted to come to you because I think that there's been a few questions about military, and you said something earlier that really piqued me. You said that you felt like children of the military get more exposure because they're always kind of, in these different places. Can you kind of expound on that a bit and just maybe share your personal opinion as a parent of two in that particular space?
Thank you for that. I meant that because we get to go overseas, that children are exposed internationally into different cultures and different languages. But I think in that regard, our kid, and moving, even let's just say going from one state to another, there are differences there. And so it's a great opportunity for parents of military kids to expose them to different students in different situations, to open up that dialogue. I think Darnell, when your parents moved you from one side of Chicago to the other to expose you, to that opened that dialogue, and I'm very deeply saddened at what happened to you at the age of 8. But I do think military families have an opportunity to take advantage of being stationed in other countries so that they're exposing their children. So I'll give you an example. I taught school in Germany, I beg your pardon, in Italy, but we lived in Germany as well. And one mother of a 4-year-old wanted to expose her son to the German culture. So she invited a little German boy to come play with her son. And so they organized these play dates. The little boys didn't speak each other's language, but they were now in a room together. And the beautiful thing about young children, and that's why I think starting at a young age is so important, there is an international language when it comes to playing because they had no trouble getting along. Trucks, I guess, make the same noise in Germany as they do in America, that kind of thing. And so I believe exposing them early on helps to open that conversation and helping them see the differences and our similarities.
So before I jump to, Jevonna, I just wanted to share the results of our poll. If you take a look at the poll, 2 questions. Do you think that city and government, local school municipalities have a responsibility to implement a curriculum that addresses race? 95% of you guys said yes. 5% of you guys said no. What age do you think you should start talking to your children about race? 63% said younger than 5. 36% said 5 to 10. 3% said 11. And some 5% said, let's wait until your child brings it up. Jevonna, that is a great segment to you. And then again, across all you guys, and Anika, I see you answering a lot of the questions, but throwing it back to you. Let's start with the teaching piece. Do you think from a curriculum perspective, schools and municipalities have a responsibility to start to implement this and have that conversation?
Absolutely. I think that we want to make sure that the literature we have in our classrooms are able to lend itself to what our families and what's happening in the world around us. I think that the specific in terms of in our social studies classrooms, in our science classrooms, and in all of our school buildings, it is definitely not optional that our education system must allow students to learn what's happening in the world around them and to make sure that they have access to all of the things that we're talking about, knowing what is racism, what does that look like, and how does that affect them in their local communities.
Can I jump in here as well?
Yeah, please go ahead.
So I think this is crucial, and I think it's crucial also in communities that don't have people of color, because the images that come are whatever the news portrays or whatever a music video portrays. And if we don't balance out those images, then again, we're building that implicit bias, like Bryant said. And so we have to expose all people to all people, because quite honestly, a lot of what's happening and the reactions and what people are feeling has to do with a fear of the unknown. So because I don't know you, I fear you, regardless of what side of that situation I'm on. And so we break down those barriers as we get to learn about each other and understand, like, you're a person just like I am. You know, you cry tears just like I do. And so we can do that when we have a curriculum that, you know, speaks to that and isn't lopsided. We can do that when we have a diverse teaching force. You know, we've been very strategic about where we place our kids. I have a problem with my kids thinking that only one group of people has the answers. So I'm looking for certain things when I take my kids to a school. I bought my house because of when I went on the webpage, what the teachers looked like in that school. I am considering not sending my son to a program because sending my kids to a program because of what the teachers do or don't look like, because it is important to me that I build a certain level of esteem where my kids say, you know what, all kinds of people are smart, not just people who look like this. And so we can get that across as well if we diversify our curriculum.
So I'd like to jump in here, and then Brian, I'm gonna come to you. And you guys will hear me share some personal stories only because that's my way to participate in this since I'm not a panelist. At 15 years old, I won a scholarship, National Science Foundation, go do an archaeological dig. You heard me say I'm from Chicago, and this is the education piece. I went down in the southern part of Illinois, which was 70 miles from St. Louis. I found out through the National Science Foundation that I was the first person to stay in this town in Illinois for longer than, the first Black person to stay in this town for longer than 2 weeks since the Civil War. They made me a Sambo cake for my 16th birthday. They made me a blackface cake. And when we talk about the diversification of education, I remembered that because there was half the camp that was very educated that felt like this was okay. And there was the other half of the camp that was very educated that was very shocked. And so the adults were the ones, and they were the educators, feeling like this was a good thing. And so to Anika, and maybe even using Bryant, that goes back to where is the right introduction? And so I'm going to pivot here a little bit and go back to the parenting piece, because we are now closer to the end of our conversation. You guys are parents, right? How do you, in your own homes, have these conversations? Because as I thought about that piece of me going to Campsville, I remember calling my parents and again having another one of those conversations. Brian, where do you, as a parent, lean in on this conversation as you have a range of ages in your children?
Yeah, so I have a 5-year-old, soon to be 6, 13-year-old, and then a grown daughter, and all three of them in my house. But anyway, so for the 13-year-old, it's been more so a process. So she's in a diverse school, and really middle school can be rough, as some of y'all may remember. And that's when, people start to like other people, bodies start to develop, all these, you get into cliques, the cliques start to form. And I did this one of two ways. I asked her, what is the basis, this is where the bias comes in, what is the basis of your clique, your group of friends? She said, what do you mean? I said, how would you see, if you look at another student, how would you determine whether or not you want to be friends with them or not? How do you make that assessment? What are you looking for? How they dress, how they speak, what they do, like, because those are forms of biases, right? You look at somebody, you observe a certain trait. So it starts around that middle school where groups become significant. And so I asked her these questions, and she's like, I don't know if they're nice, and giving me the parent answers. But I know it's deeper than that. But she's as a 13-year-old, they're starting to break away, especially talking to the parents candidly. But prior to that, I was intentional about books and TV programming, made sure she had positive images in terms of African Americans and Black history. When she would, when we would go to her school and I would see a diverse group of friends, I didn't say anything. I'm like, hey, okay, those are your friends. And so it's only been more recently, given what's happening in society and given, our education. So she's learned about the Middle Ages in Europe, right? 500 to 1500 BC, Middle Ages, Dark Ages for Europe. And they talk about these different groups in Europe. And I'm like, well, what about the Moors? Like, well, what do you mean? I was like, they're not teaching who the Moors are? They're like, not really. I said, the Moors were Black people that ruled the Iberian Peninsula, Portugal and Spain, from 711 to 1492. How can you talk about the Middle Ages in Europe and not mention the Moors? I mean, like, it is incredible in terms of the sin of omission. And so that's when I'll step in, when I notice certain gaps. But, my wife, she'll say I could be a little too militant, so I'll pull back a bit. With my 5-year-old, it's sort of still light right now. It's more about the programming and the TV shows and so forth. But they definitely have been exposed to, and my 5-year-old came of age, my 13-year-old came of age during Barack Obama, during his 8 years. So he was a formative president in her development. So she has that balance as well. So I'll stop there.
So thank you for that. Dawn, and then John, and then Jevonna. So Dawn, you're a mom of 2. And now, do you want me to say a grandmom? Because you look too young to be a grandmother, right? And so you got to unmute yourself here. You're a mom of 2. How did you introduce those conversations in your home, if you care to share?
I think they came up organically, to be honest with you, when my daughters were growing up. And they both spent a fair amount of time overseas, and in Germany, actually, in Italy. And we had quite a few families that were of mixed marriage, right? So white woman and a Black man, or vice versa. And so I think it just, we just talked about there's nobody's superior over another, right? So we would try to address it that everyone has equal rights, and we are all diverse, right? They were exposed, like I said earlier, from different cultures, different languages, different political systems, different colored people. We also had different differences in abilities in the high school where they were. So I think it just came up naturally. So, and then last, I'll just end with, I knew I liked you. Thanks for saying I don't look like a Nana, but I am.
You don't look that, you look very young. So good job, Grandma. John, your turn.
Well, I think actually a lot of it came up through the things that Dr. Burtin was sharing about books, and then becoming friends as the kids got older and were exposed to more kids from different races. But I think, again, I keep coming back to where Dr. Marks started this about exposure, and what you see is what you know, and what you know is what you believe. So I wouldn't say you're being too strident when you talk about things that are omitted, when you look at what's happened recently in Tulsa, and people not ever being taught about things like what happened 99 years ago in Tulsa. So, education is really an important opportunity to help become the great equalizer, as they say.
Jevonna?
So I would say reference then and now. My daughter is an incoming sophomore at Howard University, but I would say when she was about 4 years old, my conversation consistently with her was, you belong in those spaces. Whether it was going to a class at the Smithsonian, a class at the zoo, we would have the conversation. You will go into these spaces, you will be assertive, you will use your voice. And that's how our conversations began about race. I would say about 3 or 4 years old, because I wanted to make sure that she had access and opportunity to things I thought would help her to be a successful student and engage her interest in books and, you know, what was happening in our community. Now I'm still having that conversation. And I would say the night that we saw, you know, what everything happened with George Floyd, she came to me and said, Mom, I am afraid. And we had to have a conversation. She said, can you please call all your nephews and tell them to go in the house and stay in there? So, you know, we had to backtrack and have an even more in-depth conversation about what does that mean now? What does that mean for you and how does that look? And the conversation is ongoing. It doesn't stop. And one last thing, Darnell, that I wanted to say as I'm looking at one of the, as I was doing a research preparing for this panel, I looked at a quote from the American Academy of Pediatrics, and it says, failure to address racism will undermine our progress toward health equity. We want to make sure that our children are health conscious, and we want to think about that statement. And I found that to be something profound, because I think we are also moving towards that also.
Well, Nika, I think you talked about this a little bit. So in the essence of time, there are 3 things. Number one, I'm coming back to you. I want to thank everybody for jumping in and participating today. We have ebbed and flowed between 250 and 300, and we have had lots of engaged questions. Some of these questions, I promise some of them are stuck with me. They're sent to me and I'll get to them, but trying to moderate and answer is just not going to work right at this moment. There's 2 last things I want to do. One is I want to allow Anika to speak, and then 2, I want to allow the entire panel to just share anything that's personal to them before we wrap with me and then John. So Anika?
So am I just doing wrap up talk?
No, you're answering the question. You're going to come back and be the end of the wrap up. So
what was the question? I was answering questions online. Help me out.
See, this is why you can't do that. So we'll skip you and then we'll go to Ms. No, I'm joking. We're going to go to, the question has kind of been divergent. We're not doing that in public. There's lots of people watching us today, okay? Look, I love you. So Bryant, let's go back and start with you kind of as we end this panel. First of all, I really appreciate you joining us. Your space of racial equity and this piece, that implicit bias piece has been kind of in my crawl, because I think we don't pay attention to it, right? We kind of come from our purview and we don't think we're biased until something happens, and then you step back and you say, oh, got it. So allowing you the kind of this opportunity here at the end, is there any final thoughts that you'd love to share with us and help us maybe take, a baby step or 2 forward so that we leave this conversation with some skill sets in our toolbox?
I appreciate that. And thanks again for having me on the panel. So folks, the work starts with self, right? So I would say just sort of reflect, right? When you think about groups toward whom you're drawn to or not so much, where did that come from? How did your own biases form? Because that can inform you as to how you're going to raise your children, because most of our biases form in our early lives and they sort of just stick with us, over time. So I'm Chief Equity Officer at the National Training Institute on Race and Equity. So we provide implicit bias diversity training across the country, a lot of city and county governments, corporations, so forth. And implicit bias training is good. And so it is necessary, but it's not sufficient. So becoming aware and informed about these topics, very good. But if you want to actually change behavior, that is a process, okay? So I would encourage you to read up, especially the time that we're in now, read about the history of race and racism in the US. I have videos, so I have not a shameless plug, but I got a bias by us series.
No, you can look. Let me pause you. You can plug now. Now you can plug. Make it plug, but you can plug.
Go on YouTube and just put in Bryant Marks. My videos will pop up. I'll put in bias by us. By us is spelled BY-US, as in by us, as well as us being US being the United States. And what I'm doing there is, given all the time we're living in, I'm just putting some science out, some thoughts out that can facilitate the conversation that I think is sort of balancing their approach, but it's evidence-based, right? So I speak with passion and intensity, but I'm a scientist. And so what you'll find in those videos is some information that may be helpful with a variety of perspectives represented. But yes, we are trying to do some work. We're partnering with Morehouse College in Atlanta. That's going to be a major announcements coming out soon of the work we'll be doing together to try to add some additional value to the national conversation.
Brian, thank you. And as a 1911 brother, I appreciate you, man.
All right. I see a paddle in the back. You see, I got mine back.
I see you back there. So,
Stop it.
Dawn, I would love for you to take this last few moments to, first of all, thank you very much for being on the panel, specifically your experience as a military spouse and as a mother. Any last thoughts that you'd like to share with us again so that we can have those things in our toolkit?
Thank you, Darnell. And again, thank you for having me on the panel. I really, I feel a little bit of a deficit next to all these experts personally, but y'all have been, I've really enjoyed the conversation and I've been taking some notes. But I think I'll stay in my lane because I've an early childhood educator. And I would encourage us all, I agree, it starts with ourselves and to look at our own biases and to recognize them and acknowledge them. But then when it comes to our children, so that we need to break this cycle that is just rampant, and we need to model it, right? So when you're with young children, those of us who had the privilege to work with young kids, we need to acknowledge our differences. And accept them and also celebrate them, and to celebrate our similarities, and not to be, as I said earlier on, not to be colorblind. That it's healthy that we see these differences and recognize them, and allow our children to ask the questions, uncomfortable questions, and let that take it where it may. And then lastly, I'm always been somewhat of an optimist and positive, and I would say let's emphasize the positive characteristics and the positive things that are going to come from all of these discussions. So I thank you again for having me. And
no, thank you for joining. I think your last piece about the ally and the positive piece is a great way for us to kind of start to wrap the bow around this. Is I think we have to come from a place of positivity, but truth to your point is we've got to stand in truth and realize that this is a long-standing challenge that we all have to truly address, right? And so, Anika, you got us on mute.
Yeah.
Your turn.
My turn. I think that I would end my comments in this discussion, and happy to continue with the chat, but for what we have right now, in saying we have to get to a place where every voice is valued. And Jevonna said that starts by teaching our kids that their voices are valued. Their voices are valued, their feelings are valued. When your kid comes home and says, I don't know, something just didn't feel right in that class. Like, I can't put my finger on it, but kids will say, my teacher doesn't like me. And sometimes we dismiss that too quickly. So we need to dig a little deeper. Like, what do you mean by that? And then be willing to have not confrontation, but conversation. Like, have conversations with teachers, have conversations with kids, and get through the icky part. Some things are just uncomfortable and they hurt, and you don't always have the words for them, but you have to keep talking. And so if we shut down conversation, then we shut down progress. So we just have to be open to saying, I might not always agree with you, but I value your voice. And once we can get to that place, then we start to march closer towards one another than going in our, retreating to our separate corners and just assuming that the other person is wrong and ignorant and, what's wrong with that person. So, value every voice, be open to every conversation, and come from a place of positivity. You know, listen with open hearts, not just listen to get your point across. So.
Nika, I really appreciate that. We've got probably 10 more minutes left for those this thing. I've seen people leaving because it's probably a hard stop at 3 o'clock. Jevonna, then John, and then we'll wrap. Let me say this. As a development person at Easterseals, I'd be remiss without saying we really appreciate you guys being here. We're going to follow up with some emails. We'd love for you to donate, and also email us and share other conversations that you'd like to hear in the future. Our plan is to do these bi-monthly, not bi-monthly, 2 a month, as we are really trying to, figure out how this serves our community as well. Jevonna?
Sure. I'd like to start by thanking one of my colleagues that's not on the panel, but she's been doing this work along with me, and that's Tara Phillips. She and I have been talking over the past few weeks just about how we can move our teachers and having conversations around race and around this topic. So I wanted to thank her. And I also just want to thank all of you and all of our participants for helping Easterseals move to a place in which, our teachers are prepared, our parents are prepared to handle this conversation. So just wanted to say thank you, and thank you to Darnell and all of the people that have made this conversation possible today.
John?
Right, thank you, Darnell. Well, I am not a golfer, but I know at least Darnell on this panel is, so I'm going to use that metaphor. And I think the important thing to remember is one doesn't become a scratch golfer the first day they go out. It takes practice and determination and a willingness to change. And like Dawn, I'm an optimist. And even though I know I make lots of mistakes, I try to take the opportunity to learn from them. And I hope that that's what our listeners will do from this panel is, don't beat yourself up for everything you do wrong, but celebrate the things you're doing right and where you're improving, and that you're taking the time to work on making yourself better.
So I will end with this. Thank you guys so much for participating today. We had close to 300 people here, and for the most part, everyone stayed. We're still at 200 plus. We're going to end here, but there's 3 things. Number 1, again, thank you. Number 2, please send us questions. Anika, you didn't, give your shameless plug. Where are you? What teachers are you teaching? How can people get in touch with you?
Oh, okay. Shameless plug. I am currently working at the University of the District of Columbia. I am working with people who are interested in making a difference in urban spaces. We offer programs from early childhood education all the way through secondary. And so if any of you or any of your loved ones or anyone you know has ever thought like maybe I could make a difference in the classroom, then I will give a shameless plug for the University of the District of Columbia. If you Google my name or go on their website, you'll see my information. It's really just my name, Anika.Burtin with an I at udc.edu. Happy to talk to you about our programs or just any, I'm about to open myself, but I do mean this, any next steps that you might be considering right now. Because sometimes you just need somebody to kind of talk through, I think I want to do something, I'm not quite sure what I want to do. And I'm happy to have that conversation and help you sort of maybe figure out next steps, next path, because we offer bachelor's degrees and master's degrees, but we might not be the place, but I'll help you figure it out.
Last but not least, thank you, Anika. I appreciate you. Jevonna, you're going to end us today. So your shameless plug about Easterseals and Tara and how people can get their kids involved in our programs as we start to slowly open back up and say hello to each other without wearing masks all day.
Oh man, we have some amazing programs here at Easterseals. So if you have a child from 6 weeks to 5 years old, please give us a call. We have sites in Prince George's County, Montgomery County. We are also in Virginia. We are we have an amazing staff. So please, if you have any questions or are interested in care for your child between the ages of 6 weeks and 5 years old, we are your place.
So on that note, I would again extend our most sincere thank you to all the participants and the attendees. We're going to do a couple of things. One, we're going to share this on all our social platforms. Please feel free to share this. Number 2, please ask us additional questions. Please send us questions. Please send us topics. Excuse me, too much coffee. Please send us additional topics. We'd love to hear things that you guys would like to talk about. And we've recorded this, so we're going to put it on our YouTube platforms to share all over. Thank you guys very much. Have a fantastic rest of your day.